بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي أكمل لنا ديننا وأتم علينا نعمته بالإسلام وفضل لنا على كثير ممن خلق تفضيلا والصلاة والسلام على الذي أرسله الله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ربنا زدنا علما أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Jazakallah khair for coming out on this Saturday evening, and I'm honored to be here with you all once again for the second time at Ar-Rashad Center. This is a wonderful work that you all are doing over here, and sort of the positive spiritual energies that are growing out of this place. Allah reward you all for this, inshaAllah. So, what's change all about? In talking about personal change, we need to understand what maintains the absence of it. You know, there's a saying in the Arabic language, يُعْرَفُ الْأَشْيَاءُ بِأَضْدَادِهَا, that things are known by their opposites. And so, in order for us to understand how to change, let's talk about what maintains the absence of change. What keeps us persistent in behaviors that are actually not good for us. So it's two big things. And unfortunately, our social context, our society, feeds these things incredibly and immensely, which makes it much more challenging to maintain, because the whole social culture is sort of reinforcing these two things. That being pleasure-seeking behavior and the avoidance of discomfort. Right? Two things: pleasure-seeking behavior and the avoidance of discomfort. So when we say pleasure-seeking, we're also talking about immediate gratification. Right? We're in an era and in an age when we want immediate gratification. And some of the ways that we can clearly see that, I've sort of broken down two segments here. So for example, in our day and age, we live in a time with a lot of modern conveniences. We have dishwashers, we have alarm clocks, we have laptops, we have vehicles, we have cars, we have smartphones, all sorts of things. To do what? To ultimately avoid discomfort, right? Avoiding the discomfort of having to spend a whole lot of time washing dishes, avoiding the discomfort of having to wash your clothing with your own hands and all of these things, in the interest of what? Avoiding the discomfort of having to expend all this energy so that you can have what? More free time, right? But everybody in our day and age complains about the absence of enough time, right? So the inability to actually create the goal that's intended. So the more we are avoiding discomfort, what we are finding is that we are creating more discomfort. It's sort of, Mark Manson calls this the backwards law. The more you pursue sort of positive behaviors or pleasure-seeking, the less pleasure you actually have. So other things like what? The pleasure-seeking of credit cards. All of these things play on this human fundamental instinct to do what? To pleasure-seek and to avoid discomfort. All right? So all of us are born on the fitrah. كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ فَأَبَوَاهُ يُهَوِّدَانِهِ أَوْ يُنَصِّرَانِهِ أَوْ يُمَجِّسَانِهِ. That we are born on the fitrah, so we know right and wrong. And we have a good disposition, and we want to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we also have something called the nafs. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. That by the nafs and the way He fashioned it, that it has the capacity for good, it also has the capacity for evil. So we know that the nafs, the lower, undisciplined, untrained self, has this desire of doing what? Pleasure-seeking, immediate gratification, right? And avoidance of discomfort. That's why the dunya is called mata'ul ghurur. It's a ghurur, it's a deception. The closer you get to it, the further you're actually away. So it's this illusion. So all the way from, people don't want commitments anymore, right? They have friends with benefits in our social life. Young people kind of know this. This sort of thing didn't really exist when I was an adolescent. Is sort of a newer concept. The friends with benefits, right? So a person does not have to have a real commitment. They just have sort of a friend of the opposite gender that they can gain immediate gratification with, and they're done, sort of thing. All these sort of addictions to social media, right? The social media, what it does is sort of wires you to do what? What's the nature of a human being? The fundamental nature of a human being is that they're social. The most powerful reinforcer psychologically for a human being is social reinforcement. That's why social media is so powerful. So we figured out a way how to make you wired to seeking out social reinforcements. And it's so addictive that you're always connected to it. You always have this need to stay connected. But you know what's interesting? In our day and age, we also experience the greatest isolation of our time, of previous generations. The greatest isolations, because they're not real relationships, right? They're not quality relationships. So we do instant gratification and instant pleasure seeking, which is fed by this whole entire sort of me generation and sort of the marketing around it. And it generates this desire to kind of feed off of this, this tendency. There's a reason why when you walk into a grocery store, your child runs to the toys in the aisle, right? Why? They intentionally put those things there. Why? Because that nafs isn't refined yet. So the thing that draws their attention, they run over to, and they want to grab it. So they didn't do that by accident. It all translates into dollars, right? It makes a dollar. So they've been able to figure out the science of human beings to be able to do the following in a very sophisticated way. Let me just tell you a little bit about how the brain works with regard to the pleasure systems. Oftentimes we think of addictions, drug addictions, and we talk about the brain pathologies that it causes in drug addictions. I'm going to oversimplify this. I'm not going to sort of, this isn't a lesson in sort of brain and behavior or physiological psychology, but basically for you to get an appreciation of the level of sophistication in which this occurs. That the brain, what happens is that it has these receptors that grabs, that when you release certain neurotransmitters, you have a feel-good experience. So for example, when you're talking to your loved one, your brain is firing these neurotransmitters and you're feeling good, positive. When you are eating something that you enjoy, your brain fires these transmitters and you are feeling good about that experience. What happens is that in drug addiction, right, you put way too much stimulation, so you have an incredible amount of euphoria, feel-good experience. You're just feeling really, really good. That's why they call it a high. And then what ends up happening is that the more and more you do this, you develop a tolerance. So your body becomes accustomed to that level of euphoria. It becomes your new norm, right? So now when you don't have the drugs, you're not able to appreciate normal activities as you would typically do, right? Because your brain doesn't have the capacity, your brain isn't wired and adjusted to that level of pleasure seeking. Similarly, now when you have social media and all of these things, instant gratification works the same way. They've found studies, on the brain to demonstrate that when an individual has these neurotransmitters, excessive amount, what they do is the brain kind of compensates and develops an appropriate amount of receptors, increases the receptors. So now when you pull that away, social media, you're always wired. So what happens when you go for salah? You're not having colors jump out at you. You're not having social stimulation. You're not having, music and this and When you're talking with somebody, the ADHD, proliferation of ADHD in our day and age, so much constant amount of attention grabbing and impulse control, and pleasure seeking, that a person can't sit and concentrate, right? And that's why we have all of these sort of, when people, want to study ilm, for example, study the Islamic tradition, they're always looking for what? The fastest way to get it done. How can I get this certificate in a weekend that somebody did in 6, 7, 15, 20 years? Right? Instant gratification. Okay, I want to do what you're doing, but I don't have the capacity. I want it, and I want it now. And that's sort of the nature of our society. With obesity, we see this, right? The magic pill to make you lose weight. Women can relate to this a lot. They sort of look up all these strategies to lose weight, because generally our society sort of objectifies the female body, right? So all of these sorts of things are designed to do what? To get instant gratification. So what am I here? Another example, I'll give you another example, right? Avoidance of discomfort is producing more. Lethargy. So you feel lazy, right? On an occasion, I don't feel like getting up making dhikr, or I don't feel like getting up and praying salat. I don't feel like getting up and cleaning the room. This is the backwards law. It's a paradox. What happens is the more you give way to the lethargy, the laziness, the feeling of not doing something, the avoidance of discomfort, it produces more laziness, the feeling. The feeling is produced more. So what do you have to do? Well, that's what we're going to get to in a moment. Well, what's the way of being able to remedy some of this, inshallah ta'ala? This is another diagram. For all you students can probably relate to this, procrastinators. This line, for those who can't see it, the individuals early in the semester who are procrastinating, they're putting off doing their homework and assignments, they feel better than the people who are doing their work. Why? Because the people who are doing their work, they're actually uncomfortable. They're forcing themselves to avoid playing video games and avoid talking to people and avoid getting on the phone and all that. So they're putting in the work, and they're not feeling as much joy as those people who are pleasure seeking, right? So then what ends up happening? Later in the semester, right, when now their assignments are due, the anxiety and stress they experience is significantly more than the person who worked along the way. So the total sum anxiety that they experience and discomfort is much more when it's delayed than when they put in the work early. So you understand the point of what I'm saying to drive this home. The more you try to avoid something, the more avoidance of discomfort it produces. Hopefully I'm driving this point home. It produces what? More discomfort. The more you seek pleasure, the less pleasure you actually have. Okay? So are we actually happier as a society? Because what? We live in an era and day and age where we're spoiled. We have the access. We're the economic superpower. Well, North America, right? Economic superpower, and we have access to things that people wouldn't have dreamed ever having access to. Are we happier as a society? No, we are not. I'm not going to go through each of these, but we are actually in epidemic, we're facing epidemic mental illnesses, right? Anxiety is at its highest point, depression's at its high point. So we are the most sickest and unhappiest people in the world, despite the fact that we have the most access to pleasure seeking and avoidance of discomfort. I'm doing this on purpose. If I can drill anything home, I want these two things to sort of come away. So that's not called happiness. Sorry, that's not called satisfaction. So we're going to break down happiness in two things. There's a difference between happiness and satisfaction. Happiness is temporary. I eat a cheesecake, I feel happy, right? But I feel good about myself, and I feel like I have a connection with Allah Ta'ala. I feel like I have good relationship. That's satisfaction. It's long term. It exists beyond that instant moment. It's a constancy. Satisfaction is constant. You are feeling satisfied on a consistent basis. Happiness is temporary. It's momentary. So when we seek happiness, or in other words, pleasure seeking, we end up actually feeling less pleasure, less satisfaction, and we have temporary pleasures and happiness. You know, there's a lot of research in psychology talking about the meaningful life now. So there's 3 stages of happiness. The first is sort of the stage of happiness that's pleasure seeking. So they say there's nothing really wrong with that. You should sort of give yourself an opportunity to do some hobbies, things that you enjoy. Better than that is to do something meaningful with your life. Do a career or occupation that's going to make you happy. So that's a better, outcome of happiness. They say the best happiness is when you have, live the meaningful life. What is the characteristic of the meaningful life that psychologists, non-Muslim psychologists are saying? It's that you live for a higher order objective, a higher purpose. You live beyond yourself. And you know what's ironic? They say that to give and service to others is part of the ultimate happiness. And so what do they recommend now? Psychologists, they say, serve, give in charity. Why? Because it'll make you happy. But you know what? That's still a capitalistic notion. You do something for somebody else as long as it makes you happy, as long as it does something for you. But what about, and this is, unfortunately, they're sort of impoverished in this area of spirituality. What about if you do not for others' sake or for goodness sake, but you do for God's sake, Allah's sake, right? Now that is a different level of spirituality and contentment and satisfaction. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. We know this in the Quran. أَفَمَنْ شَرَحَ اللَّهُ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ فَهُوَ عَلَى نُورٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ فَوَيْلٌ لِلْقَاسِيَةِ قُلُوبُهُم مِّن ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. That these people's hearts harden in the absence of the dhikr of Allah. What is the dhikr of Allah? Well, the constant connection and remembrance and sort of a consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a higher order aim. Now, let's get back to the story of the nafs. I'm going to give you some strategies, okay? Strategies to defeat pleasure seeking and avoidance discomfort. So what's the goal? So if addictions and the absence of change is through pleasure seeking and avoidance of discomfort, what would be the logical conclusion as to what you need to do? Anybody? Embrace what? Embrace discomfort. And what's the second one? Don't seek pleasure, right? I mean, so embrace the discomfort and don't seek pleasure, right? And we know, that. So avoidance of discomfort and pleasure. So we're going to do what? أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّا الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ فَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا وَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ الْكَاذِبِينَ. That do people think they're going to say La ilaha illallah, you're going to have iman, and they're never going to be tested? So existential psychologists, you know what they say? They say the person who is more satisfied with their life is an individual who prepares themselves to embrace the challenges and difficulties of life. That they expect difficulties in life. They're actually more satisfied and happy. You would think, wait, that's pessimistic. Why would you expect difficulty? You should be hopeful. No. Expect the difficulty in your life. Those people are actually a lot happier. So the nafs goes through these stages, and here's sort of just an image. Oftentimes the mashayikh give this illustration of the horse analogy, right? That the horse that's untrained and untamed does what? It's not in service to you. It's not helpful to you. It doesn't get you anywhere. It won't get you to your destination. What do you need to do with the horse? You have to train it. The nafs is like the same thing. You can't let the nafs ride you, which would be pleasure-seeking and avoidance of discomfort. You have to ride the nafs. And you have to train the nafs in order to be able to serve you, so that you are more comfortable with discomfort, and that you are you're not seeking pleasure. So let's talk about some examples as to how to do that. One is building the motivation practically, right? A lot of us, what do? We come to, just want to check the time. Molana, how much time do we have? I just want to space myself accordingly. 15? Okay, inshallah. Can I get 20? Is that we can negotiate. Yeah. Saturday night. People party all night until 3 a.m. I mean, we can sit for another few minutes to listen to something beneficial, inshallah. Allah give benefit in what I say. So, first order of business is examine your motivation, building your motivation. So, your motivation to change your behavior has to be greater than the joy you get out of the behavior. I'll say that again. Your motivation to change your behavior has to be greater than the joy you get out of the behavior. For example, a person who's like, I don't care about my weight. I don't care about how I look. I'm cool. I'm okay. I'm okay being, obese. That's not a problem to me. They're not motivated. The cheesecake is more rewarding and motivating to eat than their desire to change that behavior, right? Oh, tahajjud, man, I don't know if I want to do tahajjud, like sleep. Sleep is more valuable. Really, right? That's we make these priority decisions all the time. So what happens? This is natural. So what do we have to do? Capture the moment when your motivation's elevated. For example, you come out of this talk, that the best of actions are those khairul birri is the hasty of them, right? To do them immediately. So basically, so in Ramadan, for example, you're on a high, okay? You're doing all sorts of ibadat, tilawat of Quran, and all of these things. Will you realistically maintain it throughout the course of the year? Maybe for some of us. Most of us will not do exactly what we did during Ramadan throughout the whole course of the year. That's why we get this recharge during Ramadan. So we have to tap into that motivation during that time and create a consistency. And we're going to talk about consistency, inshallah. So the idea is tap into and use the motivation to do what? Shift the lifestyle. Don't make it temporary. Ramadan is just 1 month. No, shift the lifestyle. The idea is that you're changing your lifestyle. After a while of doing this consistently, it doesn't become so uncomfortable anymore. Discomfort doesn't become so uncomfortable anymore. For a woman who's been wearing hijab her whole life, is it uncomfortable for her to wear hijab? No, it's the opposite. It's uncomfortable for her not to wear the hijab. For a man who has been wearing Islamic clothing, is it uncomfortable to be in Islamic clothing? No, it's the opposite. So the more you train it, the more it becomes accustomed to that. And so I'm going to kind of run through some of this. So doing a self-assessment, looking at your strengths and your weaknesses, knowing what are my prime times. I'm more likely to energize during Ramadan. I'm more likely to energize when I'm around certain people. They're internal and external triggers. My external triggers is I have this weakness towards media. So what? I need to make sure I'm mindful of what I surround myself with. Internal is, I have this sweet tooth. Okay, so then I need to make sure that I monitor what comes into the house. I'll give you examples of this. So there was this study, right? There's this idea. And step 3 is change the situation and you'll change the behavior. What's the situation? If you change your environment, sometimes you don't necessarily have to change yourself necessarily. You change your environment and automatically change occurs. Example, there was a study done in Chicago actually. And it's called the popcorn study. What they did was in the movie theaters, what they did was they gave stale popcorn to the participants coming to the movie. I'm not endorsing movies. Just bear with me for the example. Okay, so basically what they do is that the popcorn. So they give them stale popcorn. They pick two groups. One group, they give them a container of popcorn, very large container of popcorn. You can't finish it. It's stale. It doesn't even taste good, so you don't have any motivation to actually eat it. Then the other group, they give them another container, still large, but smaller than the other container. And they want to see how much popcorn they're going to eat. Neither of them can finish the popcorn. The popcorn is just too much in both containers. One is smaller than the other. What they find is that the people who had the bigger container ate more than 5 times more popcorn than the people who had the smaller container. What does that tell us? Change the environment, change the behavior. So if you know that you stack up all these foods and things, or you go to certain places in your environment or in your setting, you surround yourself around certain things, you're more likely to indulge in those things. So if you want to change the behavior, you have to change the environment around you, right? Simply make, and they're not huge shifts either to make, right? And the nafs is like a muscle. The more you build it, the stronger it gets. And I'll give you another study that was done. The radishes versus the cookies study. So what they did was they had these college students and they put a table of cookies and radishes. So they had one group go in and they said, listen, you guys go nuts, eat the cookies, okay? Chocolate cookies, freshly baked, smelling good. I'm sure some of you can even taste it as I'm describing it, all right? So they put it on the table. They go crazy. So they go in there, they start eating it. Second group, they say, you can only eat the radishes, don't touch the cookies. Okay, fine. It smells good, it's fresh. They go and they have to control themselves from grabbing the cookie, so they eat the radishes. So then what they do is they follow up and they give them a problem to solve. Two groups. It's an unsolvable problem, actually. So they give them a problem to solve. What they find is that the people who ate the cookies spent 19 minutes trying to solve the problem, and then they gave up. The people who ate the radishes spent 8 minutes trying to solve the problem, and then they gave up. What's the point of this? The point of this is that impulse control, controlling yourself, is like a muscle, and when it's overworked, it doesn't have the capacity for further control. Okay? And so where am I going with this is that then what needs to happen is incremental change. You have to build the muscle to be able to absorb more. Okay? Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, for example, in his discussing of child rearing, says give children dry bread on one occasion, and the next day give them normal food. Why? Because then you're building the resiliency and the comfort that this doesn't become so uncomfortable anymore. They have the capacity to absorb more. I mean, anybody who's traveled, any Canadians born and raised here, have you ever traveled, anybody traveled outside into the third world? How difficult was that? Compare that with your parents who grew up there, for example. Right? It's more difficult. Why? Because you're accustomed to certain things, and what happens? If you're on that trip and things are not going right for you, you're more likely to get frustrated and irritated because you just can't control yourself any longer. It has a limit. So what does the Prophet ﷺ say? أَحَبُّ الْأَعْمَالِ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْ قَلَّ. That the best of actions are those that are done consistently, even if they be done little. What am I driving home here? Do little by little, incrementally increase, build your ability to be uncomfortable, and make it a lifestyle. That's the goal. It's a lifestyle. There's a lifestyle shift. Satisfaction is all about lifestyle shifts. It's not about immediate gratification. It's not about the little joys in those moments. Another study that was done. Small things and intentionality make big differences. In the Vietnam study, what they did was, an NGO was sent over to Vietnam after the war, and they were charged with the task of eliminating or reducing child poverty. So it was an enormous task, right? After the country basically, raped the Vietnam afterwards, they go there and obviously people are experiencing poverty. So now you can't change the social climate because it's bad. Poverty is bad and children are malnourished. You can't change anything around it. You can't, as an NGO spending a little bit of time, you're not going to be able to change the politics, get people to get food there. No. So what did he do? He said, how am I going to do anything to reduce malnourishment? So he said, he asked the people, show me individuals in this community where the kids are not malnourished. Are there any that exist? And they said, yes, they do exist. They're a small number, but they exist. Oh, interesting. So they said, take me to these people. He took him to those people, and he found that those individuals had the exact same social conditions. The difference was that there was an intention, there was little things that they were doing that were different than the other parents. They were feeding them more spaced out. They were hand feeding them. They were getting more care and consideration and attention. The point that I'm making is that, and by the way, at the end of the study, he reduced it by a significant amount of a percentage. He said, let's do what they're doing and apply it to everyone else. He didn't change the access to resources. You can't say, look, when I make $1 million, then I'm going to be happy. When I make $1 million, I'm going to give sadaqah. When I do this, then I'm going to start praying salah. When this happens in my life, then I'm going to start growing my beard. When this happens in my life, then I'm going to start wearing hijab. No, it never happens. It's matal ghurur, right? That you fool yourself that it doesn't actually end up happening. Make the little changes. It doesn't have to be huge changes. Another study that was done was this study with the maids. And the maids, what they did was they had these house cleaners. You know house cleaners? They work a lot, right? And so they asked these house cleaners, do you guys exercise? And the house cleaners said, no, we don't exercise. So then what they did was they asked one group, so they didn't realize that what they're doing every day is more than exercise. They sort of do so much work that is equivalent to an athlete. So what they did was they basically the people who composed the study, they broke down the things that they were doing in the house. Vacuuming, they said this much calories. Making food, this much calories. Dusting, this much calories. Don't give your wives this. Do this yourself, brothers. Don't take any ideas by this. So then he says, so then they showed, so one group, the maids, what they did was they showed the one group of maids, look at this. Like all the work you do is enough calories that you're burning, that this is exercise. The other group, they didn't show them anything, they didn't tell them anything. After a month, they found that the maids that were shown the diagram lost over 2 pounds. They didn't do anything but just show them that. So what was the conclusion of that? They said it was intentionality. Once they realized that they're actually doing work, they actually took their job more seriously. They took it as a personal regimen. And it was an intentionality, right? That they were concentrating, focused on what they were doing. So embrace the discomfort, anticipate your triggers, your environmental triggers, your internal triggers, and do mukhalafat al-nafs, go against your nafs. Go in the other direction. If you have a difficulty with food, eating too much, fast. If you have a difficult time with sleeping, then stay up more, okay? And this is like, the mukhalafat, the mashayikh, they say these 4 things. They say, قِلَّةُ الطَّعَامِ قِلَّةُ الْمَنَامِ قِلَّةُ الْكَلَامِ وَقِلَّةُ الْإِخْتِلَاطِ مَعَ الْأَنَامِ. These 4 things. Food, sleep, socializing, and speaking. Why these 4 things? These are 4 things that are natural to a human being. Everyone has to speak, right? We're al-insan hayawanun natiq, right? We are a speaking creature. That's what we're defined as. So we speak. We have to socialize. We have to socialize with our families. We have to sleep, don't we? We have to eat. There's no monasticism in Islam where you deprive yourself of food entirely and sleep. So if you can control these 4 natural things in life, then you can control all of the unnatural addictions. Because your body is not programmed to want those things. So if you can control the natural things, you'll control the unnatural things as well. And this whole idea of mukhalafat al-nafs is to create i'tidal, a balance. And Mufti Taqi Usmani, also in the spiritual discourses, where he actually did ta'aleem with Maulana on that, he mentions the analogy of the paper, right? The paper, when you bend the paper, how do you get it straight? Do you bend it flat? No, you got to bend it the other way. So you have to go in the other direction. So that's what i'tidal is about. Go in the other direction. Okay? So one strategy is incremental change. And then the other strategy is to go in the other direction. When you're creating a new habit, you can do incremental change. When you are fighting an addiction, go in the other direction. If you're addicted to this, turn it off. Go without it for a week. You know, they have these camps. Oh, Maulana Bilal was telling me about these camps where people go and they get unplugged for a weekend. They're addicted. They're even considering putting it in the psychological disorders, these phones, like a social media, device disorder or something like that. It's a really strange concept, right? Document the change. I'm going to run through the rest. I know I'm kind of exceeded my time already. Harm reduction is that you document the change. All of us, what do? We take our budgets very seriously. You check your bank account maybe 3 times a day. This is something that you do, right? This is what we do. I do this too. But what happens is that how often you document your spiritual progress, right? So how many times we make a business plan? Is any business gonna succeed without a budget? No. So then budget yourself food. How much food you can give. Budget yourself how much dhikr you need to do. Budget yourself how much sleep you need to do, and record it. Record it. And we have this sort of technique in psychological interventions where we monitor behavioral change. So we put it on a graph, frequency, right? Let's say the week 1, put on a graph. Week 2, put on a graph. So document it. حَاسِبُوا قَبْلَ أَن تُحَاسَبُوا وَزِنُوا قَبْلَ أَن تُوزَنُوا. That take account of yourself before account is taken of you. Right? If you're going to get audited as a business, you're definitely checking your records. Right? But if you're going to meet Allah, are you checking your a'mal? So replacing the behavior with a positive opposite. So take the thing that you're addicted to. For example, set your exercise time at a time when you're most likely to eat. So it's called a positive opposite. Do it at a time when you're most likely to indulge in that addiction. Because the addiction has these triggers, and our body learns the triggers. So you go into that environment and you start to get triggered. You have a craving response. So then do the opposite. You can't be exercising and eating at the same. I guess maybe you can be. That's really not a good way of losing weight. But you can't really be doing those two things at the same time. And get support and supervision. I'm going to stop on this one. Get support and supervision. You have the mashayikh here, mashallah. Those specialists in tasawwuf, tazkiyatun nafs, behavioral change. These are your specialists. This is a wonderful opportunity. Yeah, you have this opportunity in the Toronto area, mashallah, Al-Rashad, Masjid Taqwa, and other places. Get connected. Get the support that you need. Develop. Imam al-Ghazali said, إِذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ بِعَبْدِهِ خَيْرًا بَصَّرَهُ بِعُيُوبِ نَفْسِهِ. This is كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام, that he brings this hadith in his Ihya. Then he goes on to say, how do you change your behavior? If Allah wants khair for an individual, He'll give him perception over his deficits. How do you get perception over your deficits? He says there's 2 ways. He says one, which is the known way, the way that is the practice of the A'immat al-Kibar, is to find a sheikh. And that you take a suhbah, يَنْكَشِفُ لَهُ تَارَةً وَيُكْشِفُ لَهُ تَارَةً. That sometimes, just by being in the suhbah of him, you end up realizing certain things. And sometimes he makes you realize certain things. And then he says there's another, and that's the best way. He said there's another way. Find a rafiqan صالحا عالما بهذا الأمر. That they shall be a pious person, a friend, a colleague that either knows you really well or knows how to get some change, right? I mean, somebody who's a little bit ahead of you, you can take their suhbah and learn a little bit. In New Jersey, they have this Fajr Club. We went there last weekend to do a training, and they have this Fajr Club. The brothers get together, they have the club, and they have breakfast together afterwards. It's wonderful. And then find the strategies you need to be able to, make this happen. If you want change, you'll make it happen, inshallah. And I say this to myself first, of course. There's also there's a invention that they had come up with. It's called the clocky. You ever heard of this? Clocky. So this is the solution. This can be a solution to your Fajr problem. Basically, Clocky, what you do is you put the clock alarm on, and it jumps off your table, and it's on wheels. You can see it. It's on wheels, and it drives and it goes around in circles, right? So you're disoriented, right? You get up and you're like, oh my God, and you can't, and it has no snooze option. So it's I'm not endorsing the product. I don't get money for this, right? I mean, but it's a strategy. They came up with a strategy, Clocky. It actually has, inshallah, it's beneficial if you want to be able to use something like that. And then do, obviously, consistent reassessment to be able to reevaluate yourself to see how much progress you're making. And obviously, the best way to do this is, of course, with supervision and to have somebody overlook this progress for you. And I conclude on this. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.